Welcome back, everybody. Miguel Iturrate back here on the MMA Museum podcast. As is happening more and more frequently, I'm joined by Todd Atkins, my sidekick, and another fellow historian. And we got a special treat. I think they're all special, but this one is extra special because we got a real old school pioneer and different than some of the other guys, a man who's still in the game today, in the broadcasting end at a high level and doing a lot of great stuff. And I'm talking about Dean Dinero Thomas. Dean, how are you?
I'm good, man. What a treat it is to be here with you guys. It's very nostalgic to be here. So thank you for having me, and just what a treat it is to be here.
I warn you, Dean, I've gotten tears out of people in these interviews remembering stuff, so be careful. It's
I'm
going to
like,
be a
no,
lot
man,
of
hold
fun.
on, wait a minute, no. nah,
Now,
I'll be careful. I'll be careful. But this is special because in our sport, I think our history is lost. And, it's always important that we're able to tell the stories of how we got here. So it's always a pleasure to come on and talk about the old days.
I appreciate it, Dean. I agree with you completely that if we're not careful, there's some history that's just going to go away. And, uh, it deserves some treatment, especially yourself, who, even in those early days before the UFC was with the Zuffa stuff and things like that, you were already fighting for years when the UFC and Zuffa got together, you'd already fought at a high level. Were you ever ranked number one in the world? Because you've got the talent for that. You had to be like in the top three for sure at one time. What do you remember about that aspect?
Yeah, I remember reading Full Contact Fighter once and being I think I was number three. I was behind like Jens Pulver, and it was maybe Sato or Uno, and I was like number three.
Yeah,
And we were lightweights at the time, but thinking back, when I look back at what we were at the time, we were all really bantamweights.
yeah.
So like we were like today's bantamweights, but for the time we were lightweights. We were 155ers. But but I remember being number three at the time. So
Yep. So we're
yeah,
talking about a cream of the crop guy with a lot wide ranging skill set, especially for those days. Now everybody's kind of, versed in all kinds of different aspects of it. Dean, I would say you probably were stronger on the feet than on the ground, but like I said, you were a vastly varied fighter from even those early days. And the number three ranking, it wouldn't have surprised me if you had spent some time at number one. But you're from Florida, right?
yeah, came up in Florida, and Florida was pretty much a hot spot for MMA back in the day. It's always been a hot spot. South Florida's always been a hot spot. And I attribute that to the weather being similar to Brazil. So it was very attractive to Brazilians. Conan Silveira and the Silveira brothers were always here, and they've always brought a lot of MMA to South Florida. So um, it was a good place to get a start. It really was. That we were kind of ahead of everybody else, just being having that access to having Brazilians back in the day.
For sure, for sure. Now, so tell us about your youth. How did you wrestle in high school or in grammar school? What sports were you into, and how did you forge your path into the martial arts?
See, that's the weird thing about it is that I didn't really play a lot of sports. I always wanted to, but I didn't really play a lot of sports. I played like a little bit of football. I tried out for the football team every year in high school. I quit every year because it just wasn't for me. I was really quiet. I was really shy, and I just wasn't really a team player. Just for whatever reason, I just wasn't a team sport guy. Even though I loved it, I just wasn't a team sport guy. And that was kind of why I was attracted to fighting, because it wasn't a team sport. It was something that I could do and go out and be 100% accountable for the result. If I won, I pat myself on the back. If I lost, it was my fault. I didn't have to rely on somebody else to score a touchdown, or me messing up the game, losing the game for the rest of the team. So that was what really attracted me to fighting, was the fact that I could be 100% accountable for the result. And And when I first saw fighting, I mean, it wasn't like it is today where there was access to it. It was just like we saw it. We wanted to learn how to do it, and then some random guys were throwing fights in bars. So, so like that was like, all right, I gotta try this. I gotta try it. There's a fight coming up in this bar. I gotta try it.
Do you remember the bars down in Florida? What was the first bar you went to fight in?
Well, the first event that I ever competed in was an open shoot fighting tournament. It was an open shoot fighting tournament, and I took second in this tournament. Somehow, I don't know how I did. I ended up taking second in the tournament. And then from that, a guy by the name of Gus Pereira threw a show in this. It was like a little theater in Hialeah, Florida. It was a shoot fighting tournament, and I ended up fighting Efren Ruiz.
Okay, tough guy.
Yeah, Efren Ruiz. Yeah, and he's still in the game. So it was just crazy times, man. I can't remember some of the other bars, but I just remember just these events popping up. It wasn't legal. I mean, it wasn't illegal, but it wasn't sanctioned. So like anybody, if you could find a ring, because they weren't in cages, if you could find a ring and you could put it up in a bar, you had an event.
Yeah. Now, how did you go in there? Did you have any martial arts training, or were you a street fighter? Did you get into a lot of scraps on the street?
No, here's what it was. It was that I was so captivated by the idea of jujitsu, of a smaller guy beating up a bigger guy because I was a smaller guy. And when you're a smaller guy, you're intimidated by bigger guys. You don't want to admit it, but that's the reality of it. And I was always intimidated by bigger guys. So when I saw jujitsu, I saw Royce Gracie doing jujitsu. I had to learn how to do it. So me, myself, and Paul Rodriguez. I don't know if you remember Paul Rodriguez.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we went to high school together, and we bought videotapes, and we just practiced in the backyard. Me and him and whoever would join us would just practice what we saw on videotapes, and we
Chad
just took
Saunders,
that.
right? He was the other one.
Yeah, Chad Saunders. Yeah, he was a little bit younger than us. He came up with us, but we would just practice what we saw on those videotapes.
And you
And
you also had Mikey Cardozo.
yeah, Mikey Cardoza. He was officially in Miami at the time. So we lived in a town called Port St. Lucie. Eventually lived in Orlando, but we just kept in touch with Mikey Cardoza because he had a judo background and he had access to other Brazilians in Miami where they were like training for real, like they had real Brazilian instructors. We just had videotapes. So because he had access to that, we kept in contact with him and he would answer a lot of questions for us.
Yeah, I remember that crew of people um, were really one of the first, like, where everybody was talented. Paul Rodriguez knocked out Dennis Holman on my show. I thought Cardozo's another guy. He was legit 135 even back then.
Yeah.
I thought he was another guy that if we had him here would probably tell us he was ranked in the top 3 in the world at one point because he was phenomenal. Um, so you hooked up with some real talent early. Now, your first official fight on Sherdog comes up as October of 1998, something called the Jacksonville Valley Tudo, and you fought a guy named Thomas Velasquez. What do you remember about this experience?
Again, that was in Jacksonville at this again a theater. This was like a theater where I guess it was set up. It was like the original Sphere type setup where it was like on a stage with a cage on a stage, and then the seating was all in one area. And I remember it was in a ring. This guy didn't know what he was doing. No one really knew what they were doing at the time, but we just all saw it on TV and was like, "Oh, I gotta try this. I can do this." Um, but I remember fighting this guy, taking him down really fast and arm locking him just really fast. And it was like the first time that my brothers had gotten the opportunity to see me fight because they had never seen me fight before. So that was kind of special for me. That was the first time they got a chance to see me fight.
That is cool, and your memory is correct. It was an armbar finish in a minute and 2 seconds, so 62 seconds. So you establish yourself right away as a guy that you recognize there's levels to this game already, and you were already at a higher level than just your average dude that comes in here. Um, about a month and a half later, and this is how frequently these guys fought, and this is about to get real interesting, but you fought on something called the Ybor Valley Tudo against a guy named
Yeah,
Rodney Brown.
Ybor Valley too. That was in
Okay.
Tampa, and that was where I met Jamie Levine.
We're going to
So
get to him.
yeah, so that was the Ybor Valley Tudo, and this was an event where I was actually supposed to fight a guy by the name of Petey Cook. He was a
Okay.
boxer from Winter Haven who used to train with the dude with Edson Berto and them guys.
Okay.
And he used to train with them, but for whatever reason, he didn't show up. And so I'm in the back waiting for my guy Petey Cook to show up. He doesn't show up. Another guy was there, Rodney Brown. He'd been a football player at Bethune-Cookman University. He was 225 pounds. I'm 150 pounds. His opponent didn't show up either. So the promoter was like, Jamie was like, hey, his opponent didn't show up, your opponent didn't show up. Why don't you guys fight? And before I had an opportunity to actually think about the danger of fighting a guy 70 pounds heavier than me, I was like, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm always crazy. I said, yeah, of course I'll fight him. So that's how that's how that fight got matched up. And I ended up taking the fight. And again, I didn't even think about the dangers of it because like that's just where our mindset was back then. Like we didn't care. And I ended up winning the fight. So
This one was
and then
4 minutes. So did you take any damage? Did the big guy hit you?
still took no damage. I immediately took him down. He couldn't defend a takedown. I immediately took him down. And it just took me about 4 minutes to set up I actually finished him with a key lock. It took me about 4 minutes to finish that, the Americana.
Yep, yep. Now, so Jamie Levine was the promoter. So this is early Jamie Levine and the Ybor Valley Tudo. What is Ybor? What is it? What was he thinking?
Ybor is a subsection of Tampa. It's
I got you.
it's like the little area of Tampa where everybody hangs out, all the clubs and bars and so on and so forth.
Okay, and Jamie's a guy. He's not with us anymore, so we won't get into bad mouthing him or anything like that. But he was a controversial figure back in those early days. What was he? And here you get a little taste of that, where he's talking guys 70 pounds heavier into fighting each other, even though that type of thing did happen. You know what I mean?
It was a
Yeah,
necessity
I
back
tell you
then.
what, as being in this game for so long, I appreciate Jamie Levine. I really do. I'm friends with his son. I remember his son when he was young, and he's older now, and he's a man now, and I'm still friends with his son. But I appreciate Jamie Levine. I really don't have anything bad to say. Like even if I wanted to, I don't have anything bad to say about Jamie Levine because he was a man who loved fighting, wanted to see it done. There was no real blueprint on how to do it. He was just trying to make it happen. He really did just try to make it happen. He may not have always, it wasn't easy for him to make it happen. Again, there was no blueprint on how to do this. And yeah, and some people might have got screwed in the process, but that was just like people still getting screwed today. And there's a
Yeah.
blueprint to it, right? There's a blueprint to it today. So, um,
I
yeah,
was
I have
telling
nothing.
Miguel off the record, that I remember you said when we talked, um, you were like one of the first guests on my show, and you said Jamie always made sure he ate before you ate. You remember
Yeah,
that?
and that was it. Basically, that was just it. Like he just made sure that he was going to get his money before anybody else did. Outside of that, like he really loved MMA. He really loved the sport, really loved to make good matches. And I can appreciate that.
And yet he had an eye for talent. He
Yeah.
knew his talent,
Oh,
which not everybody
very
does.
high for talent, for sure.
And it's funny you say that. Me and Todd do a news podcast, and the news just recently broke that Nate Diaz didn't get paid for his George Masvidal boxing match. I don't know if you
Right.
saw that. And
I saw it.
I feel like back in the old days, you don't want to try to rip Nate off. That would have been the wrong thing. But it seems like they kind of did get used to the blueprint that the UFC is always going to pay you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like they forgot, but it can still happen, man. Here it happened again, even now.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
had to do a show because I was like, Miguel, I want you to educate new fans on how this kind of thing could happen because it happened a lot back when you were coming up and we were following the sport and all that.
Yeah, again, like there was no real regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So if a guy told you he was going to pay you, there was no commission there to make sure that you were getting paid. Like if he stuck around to pay you, that was a good thing. That was, now looking back, like that was actually pretty honorable of him to stick around and pay you, because I probably wouldn't have. I'd have been like, yo, man, we got our money. Let's run. Hit the back door.
So here we got the Ybor Valley Tudo, which is Jamie Levine maybe making his promotional debut. Your next fight is on his World Extreme Fighting 1 show, where here he was starting to get it, because World Extreme Fighting is a show that a good show, and he got them to a certain very high level at that time. And you fought a guy named Scott Bills. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Scott Bills was a teammate of yours at some point, right?
Yeah. Again, this was at the time when resources were limited. So Scott Bills we ended up being teammates and good training partners. But this was Scott Bills at the time was training with Mike Lee and those guys out in Sarasota, Florida, and he had actually fought Paul Rodriguez to a draw. So I was actually really nervous about fighting him, because Paul used to kick my butt. And he had fought Paul to a draw, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna beat this guy." But so somehow, man, it was a 4-man tournament, 4-man lightweight tournament. Myself, Scott Bills, Mike Lee, and then
Ed Lutz.
P.D. Cook. P.D. Cook, actually, the guy I was supposed to fight in the Tampa Valley Tudo was the original guy in the tournament, but he had gotten hurt in the he had gotten hurt. One of them, him or Mike Lee, had gotten hurt in their original match, and they brought Ed Lutz out the crowd to fight me in the finals.
Another old school thing that happened there, the crowd fight. But to look at this, Mike Cardozo fought on this card. I remember the name Mark Toller, another solid people. You have Tommy Sauer on here, Nick Starks, another Florida kind of submission jiu-jitsu guy. Nick Starks used to drive up to Indiana to fight on the early hook and shoots too. So you could see
I remember
was starting to put together the blueprint, as you call it.
Yeah, and I remember Nick Starks being one of the early sort of celebrities, because he had videos out, and I remember him being on Hook and Shoot, fighting on Hook and Shoot, and he had his own video series out. So he was one of the and that's a name I haven't heard in a long time, from Orlando, and he had videos out, and he was an early celebrity of MMA. So shout out to Nick Starks. You got to be out there somewhere. I hope you're still with us. But shout out to Nick Starks.
Yeah, and Nick, if you're out there, brother, give me a call. You remember Miguel from Hook and Shoot, man. Let's do an interview. You know what I mean? Let's go. So next appearance, you're firmly, and I remember you as for a while as a Jamie Levine guy too. Like that, you were like, I had my fighters like Aaron Riley and that sort of stuff, and Jamie had his guys, and Dean Thomas was certainly one of those guys. Now, the World Extreme Fighting 1 was an 8-fight card. By World Extreme Fighting 2, and one of Jamie's signatures was putting together massive cards. This was a 14-fight card, and a lot of names. Now he bought the Tyrone Roberts against David Dodd in the main event. You've got Tommy Sauer, Andy Sanders, who was another Iowa fighter, Brazilian Marcelo Grosso. It's starting to get big here. Were you feeling like there was progress being made from fighting in the Ybor Valley Tudo to this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because he had started to put together. Again, he was passionate about what he was doing. How he was getting the money, I don't know. I think he was getting it from his uncle, who was like this, a very successful dentist. But he started putting this together, and the production values were getting bigger. So we were starting to feel like we were legit athletes. Like at the time, we were like, "Yo, what's going? Like we should be on Sports Center." That's what I'm thinking, because Jamie Levine was actually putting together like massive events, and we didn't really know what it meant at the time. But looking back, like those were really good events. Like he had really good production value on some of these events, and I was looking back now, I can say, man, I'm glad to have went through that experience with him, because it really kind of helped me but by the time I got to the UFC, and even now, just being used to the cameras, that's
Yeah.
really because of Jamie Levine.
And now, lo and behold, the other part of it is there's some people that do nice shows, but they get no publicity. You know what I mean? But Jamie was getting your names out there and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, Dean Thomas, he's 5-0, and you get the call from Shudo to go fight Kyle Luna in your fight with your 5-0 fight.
Yeah,
What
well,
do you,
that's the thing too, is like not only was Jamie getting us opportunities and making us like celebrities, like he was getting us gigs on like radio shows. I remember going to radio shows and getting us gigs doing interviews with newspapers. So he had really gotten my name out there. And that's why when I got the call for Shudo, I got the call from a guy named Charlie Anzalone, who actually worked on the Nevada State Athletic Commission for a long time. He was kind of a liaison to the Shudo organization. And I remember him calling me to fight Mock Sakurai. But I didn't have a passport. Yeah, I didn't, yeah, that was exactly the face I made too when they said him. And I was like, woo. And I didn't have a passport, but I remember driving down to Miami like that day to get a passport. And I ended up getting a passport. By that time, they already went with another Brazilian guy. But then afterwards, they said, well, you know what? We're still going to use you. You can fight Kyle Uno on your first time here. So that was how I got the gig for Kyle Uno.
yeah,
No,
I'll tell
Charlie
you.
Anzalone after the Harold Howard when Hoist had to throw in the towel. Whatever. The camera comes to this guy who's got like on a red suit and the hair on his chest. He's like, like that was Charlie Anzalone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'll tell you.
he
Not to
looked
toot
totally
my own
different, but
horn,
yeah.
not to toot my own horn, but if you look on the MMA Museum podcast roster, I've interviewed Charlie
Yeah,
Angelo
yeah.
about
Did
less than
you?
a year ago. So he's
Yeah.
still out there and still a great
guy.
storyteller. Gave us a lot of insight onto like early UFC, Andy Anderson's and the guy. That's the subject matter we talked about with Charlie. So definitely one of the early characters of the sport. He's a classic for sure. So and he was doing good work because working with Levine, he got you over to Kowloon. So with all due respect to Scott Bills and Rodney Brown and some of the guys you fought before, now Kowloon is a pro. What was your
Yeah.
feeling here? Because this was a 3-round fight. He got you, but he got you in the third. So you're hanging. But what was the overall impression? About levels and stuff.
I mean, it really taught me a lot about levels and so like because when I'm here in Florida, I'm like, all right, essentially a regional fighter. But again, having the experience with Jamie and all the TV and production, it felt like it was getting bigger, but there was still some imposter syndrome. So getting over to Japan, and it wasn't like today where you got your corner. Like I had no corner with me. Like Charlie Angelo, I had never met Charlie. He flew over there and met me there. Luckily, I had met Ryan Bowe for the first time over there, who had been living there and had a lot of experience, and he kind of took me under his wing and showed me the ropes in Japan. But it was very tough to go over there, fight their number one guy. He's coming off a win over Sato, who was a god at the time, and to fight this guy, it really I had to dig deep in terms of mentally to be like, all right, I can do this. And I remember that first round of the fight, I felt like I was in control and I was winning. But again, imposter syndrome. Again, I was sitting there in my head thinking, how am I hanging with this guy who's a pro? Like this guy is a pro. And I remember that third round, I felt like I was winning the fight. And in the third round, he's pacing back and forth. And my anxiety just kicked in like, boom. And then I started, the negativity in my head was telling me, what are you doing here? You are not a pro like these guys. You're not supposed to be. And I remember when he finally took me down, in my head, I told myself, man, this is good enough. And I remember just tapping out just because I did not feel like I belonged there. Like after all that, I didn't feel like I was, yeah.
But the thing is, because you went on to have a pretty stellar career, would you consider this a good early learning lesson?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a great learning lesson for me. And again, like all those things were learning lessons. I remember when I went over with Mike Cardoso when he fought He fought somebody in show. I'm trying to remember his name, but I remember asking like, how do you know that you're able to hang with these guys? I remember asking him that, and he said, "Man, they're just like us, but they live over there." And I
Yeah,
didn't,
but
and
he
like
was a
for
wise
me,
guy,
yeah,
wise, not like a wise, like snarky guy, like a real intelligent guy.
yeah, and for me, like hearing him say that was like, yeah, it's true. Because like I'm sitting there thinking like if they're in Japan, they're on some different level. But he said, man, they're just like us, but they live over there. And I was like, damn, he's right. And then from that moment on, I kind of just realized that we're all really the same, just we live in different places. So it wasn't no longer did I really kind of have that idea of they're better than me because they come from a different place.
So you come back, and what I didn't mention, one of the things I forgot to mention here is that going back to the early days, you fought Rodney Brown December 15th, 1998 in your second fight, and then you fought that four-man tournament for Jamie 4 days later on December 19th, 1998. Unless they got the dates wrong, is that correct? That Jamie was
Yeah,
running
yeah.
shows 4 days apart?
I remember Jamie. I remember meeting him, and he was like, "Hey," and that was when I first met him. I remember he was like, "Hey, hey, you want to fight in my show in 4 days next weekend? It's $500 to the winner." And I was like, "Word, $500? Let's do it." And I was like, I remember I was like, "Man, I'm rich. I won that $500. I was like, I'm rich." Spent a hundred that night, had 400 left, and was like, "Damn, I'm not rich as I thought I was."
So yeah, yeah. So and that's the kind of thing that doesn't happen anymore either. But you look back at it, and those are the kind of things that harden you and make you a real experienced fighter. You come back after the Uno loss, and it's not too long. You take about a month off, and you're back for Jamie at the Stomp in the Swamp, which is maybe another show where his level jumped up. This was Maurice Smith against Conan Silveira in the main event. And you talk about that's two Hall of Fame level fighters fighting in the main event. Again, this was a 21 fight card. So, no joke. What do you remember about the Stomp in the Swamp?
Again, I remember this was another big event. And Jamie flew us out to Louisiana, another big event, and it was so cool to be on a card with Maurice Smith and Conan Silveira because those guys were legit guys. Like they had been on TV; those were legit guys. So to be on an event with them, and again, that whole event was just big. And I remember I was fighting Ken Allen, who had beaten Mike Cardosa. So I was like, man, this is gonna be a tough fight, but I knew that I was gonna be able to get him. Um, but we were having so much fun back then, man. Just pretending to be superstars and fighters. It was such a good time to be in MMA. I mean, it sucked in terms of compared to what they're getting now in terms of financially and how they're making a living, but the freedom that we had and the fun that we had in terms of just showing up and fighting was so awesome.
Yeah, and you take a kid like me, a kid from New York, and you get to see the world, and you're starting to get
Yeah.
that feeling too on an airplane going to New Orleans. I think the show was. This is the second, just to give Jamie his credit, this is the second appearance, and Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira made his debut for Jamie at World Extreme Fighting 5. Here, this is his second fight. You got Roman Reutberg, who was a Matt Hume student. You got Paul Rodriguez in there. You got Carl Schmidt, who was a Marine, who was a tough dude. People fighting tournaments. Jeremy Bennett from Pittsburgh. I mean, this is a who's who of names uh, that I enjoy looking back at too. Do you remember? Did you see some of the other fights, or were you backstage kind of doing your own thing, or were you
No,
like a fan
I
too?
know, I remember all of this. I remember like watching fights. I remember these guys, and I would just remember. See, what people don't understand is it like at the same time, like the UFC was going on, but this was rivaling to us. This was rivaling the UFC. It wasn't like today where it's like UFC's big dog and everybody else is everybody else. This was
Yeah,
right up
yep,
there with the UFC.
yep. You're
We
absolutely
had
right.
seen this was on
This is
TV just like the
1999.
UFC.
Yep, in '99, it was still under Bob Meyerowitz. They were still having pay-per-view trouble. There was no dream of the Ultimate Fighter or being on mainstream television or anything like that. They were struggling too. So and Jamie was doing cutting edge stuff. Now your next appearance, you're back in Louisiana for reality combat fighting. This doesn't look like a Levine show. What was going on here?
I'm trying to remember. I can't remember who this was. But again, it was probably a situation where they saw me on Jamie's show and reached out to me and asked me if I'd come up. I can't. Who was the opponent on this one?
Tim Douglas.
Tim Douglas. Oh, yeah, I remember. He was terrible. He was like really bad.
Okay. Okay. And then, yeah,
again,
you
this
would
was a
get that.
situation where I think this was a situation where they saw me on Jamie's show and again, like we were kind of celebrities at the time, so they probably asked me to come on their show to give their organization some credibility. And of course, you know what I'm saying? I probably didn't even ask how much money. I was like, all right, I'll show up and
Yeah.
fight.
And
I remember this
45
guy.
seconds later, you were getting
Yeah.
paid because it was a
Yeah.
short fight. Now,
Yeah.
here you are. I think your record's up to 7-1 again, and Tim Douglas wasn't on your level. Maybe Ken Allen was a little smaller than you, and you had high motivation for it. You only lost is to Carl Luna, a talented guy who was maybe number one in the world, in Japan, and just come off beating a legend. Now you go back to Japan and you fight Dakansuke Mishima, and we'll just call him Mishima here. But Mishima was another otherworldly level dude, fantastic fighter, fit, motivated, and you get your win. So how did that feel to go back to Japan and score a win against another legit guy like that?
I got to tell you, throughout the career, there were many moments where I felt like I turned a corner and had to grow. Obviously, the first Uno fight was one, just like that experience. This was another one because I had no idea that a person could be this good at fighting. And Mishima was that good. And I had to learn it on the job. I remember just watching video of him thinking, okay, he's strong, he's pretty good. But then when I got in there with him, he grabbed me and threw me down. I was like, oh my God. I just remember thinking that in my head, like, I can't believe, because he was way stronger than Uno, just physically, way more physical than Uno. And I was like, I can't believe this guy. Like they put me in there with this guy. And that was a fight that I really am proud of myself because I had to dig deep. I had to dig deep, be in the moment of the fight, and then I'm getting destroyed. Like he's taking me down, passing my guard, just absolutely destroying me. But I remember in the fight thinking, man, he's getting tired. If I can just wait this out, he's getting tired. He's getting tired. He's getting tired. And then I caught him with a knee, busted him open, ended up getting the win. And then that's really what put me on the map. And I remember after that fight, I was ranked 7th in Shudo, and I was so proud of that, being ranked 7th in Shudo after beating him. Just feeling like knowing how good he was and being able to get that win, it was a real strong moment for my career.
Well, why didn't you fight in Shudo again after that?
I'm not sure why. Like I would have.
Yeah.
I think I would have. I think
you had this good fight with Uno, then you beat Mishima, and then they didn't bring you back.
No, I think it really was the fact that after that, my career took off here in the States.
Yeah, you were, and we're going to describe a massive streak of guys. In World Extreme Fighting 9, you fought Don Banville, which obviously is a win, and Don's not really remembered. But the next set of opponents, you're starting to really show not only pedigree but consistency. World Extreme Fighting New Blood, you fight UFC champion Jens Pulver. Talk about that fight.
Yeah, that one really put me on the map. And again, like all these fights, I can take something away from them. And that, like Don Banville at the time was a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. Like that's not a big deal today, but back then, that was a big deal because I don't even think I knew anybody who had anything more than a blue belt. So fighting him was, and being able to get a win over him was a big confidence booster. And then going in with Jens Pulver, again, part of me probably would have been like super afraid of him, but having that experience of going to Shudo and fighting Uno and Mishima, I was like, I'm the A side here. I'm the dude that fought in Japan. Because again, the UFC wasn't where, I mean, it was big, but it wasn't what it is today. So, I mean, it was cool to fight Jens, and I know that he had all the exposure in the States, but for me, I was like, I'm the legit fighter because I'm the one with the Shudo experience. So I'm gonna go out there and dog this dude. So I really was prepared. I felt like I was mentally prepared to fight Jens. And when I got that win over him, I really was not surprised. I really was like, I'm supposed to win because I'm the one with legit Shudo experience.
And guys like me and Todd, we always talk about Shudo, especially in the lighter weights, where the UFC really just started dabbling in the lighter weights at this point. They had the best fighters in the world, there's no doubt. But you described to me,
100%. And that's why even today I have a special place in my heart for Tayuda who's a Shudo guy in the UFC now.
Yeah.
And I have a special place for him because he's the last of a dying breed. Like there's no one else representing Shudo, I don't think, in the UFC except for him. He's undefeated right now and he's killing it. But for me, I'm rooting for him so much because of what he represents and what he means to my journey in MMA, just being that Japanese Shudo guy.
And another thing I noticed in your remembering the Jens Pulver fight, you talked earlier about the imposter syndrome, where you think you're a fighter, but there's levels to the game. Now it seems like, because one of the things that I get to talk to a lot of fighters. I'm very blessed that way. One of the things that the top guys have is confidence. That confidence that I can beat anybody on any given day, and it sounds like you would evolve to that level. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I started getting there. At this point, I was there, having the Japanese experience, then beating Jens Pulver, having all that. I felt like I was one of the best in the world.
How did Jens fight go? Because it's in the second round, and you got him fast in the second round. How did the first round go? What do you remember?
I controlled and dominated him. It was a little bit of striking, but I ended up taking him down. He ended up getting back to his feet, but I think I had controlled him the first round, just being a little bit more savvy, just understanding the game, the total. And that was the one thing that was always an asset for me and beneficial for me, is it because I didn't have a background in wrestling or anything like that. I always knew MMA from an MMA perspective. So we talk about the fighters of today. My mentality towards MMA was always that way, for always of picking and choosing what I liked from each discipline. So, and I think that's what makes me a unique coach today, because I don't have a filter. Jen's had a wrestling background, so I was like, he sucks at jujitsu, so I knew I was gonna catch him.
Yeah, and it is interesting there. At some point now, a young guy like Rosas, for example, in the UFC, he grew up doing this. This is his sport. Very few guys back then, maybe Jeremy Horn was one, and he's another guy who's an all-timer. That this was their sport, and you qualify like that. This was your sport from the very beginning. No other filters. That's a very interesting assessment. I like it.
But the weird thing is we had to teach ourselves. Like now, these young kids get the cheat code. We did all the work for them. We done did all the work for them, man. So now we can give them the cheat codes.
You actually brought up the Nick Starks video series, and that shows how old school you are, brother. That's amazing. I remember like I said, I had to interact with Nick a lot because Nick fought for us. So I like Nick. Nick was another guy who was confident for back then and things like that. Eventually, he, his winning streak in hook and shoot, he didn't do too well under us because we always gave him our tough guys. So, but I would love to talk to him again. Now you get another one of those experiences. This is one of those experiences that the early fighters say, all of them remember it fondly, and this is your first time going to Hawaii. And
First time I
they
met
didn't,
him.
yeah, they didn't do you much
That's where I met him
favors
there.
putting you in with Stephen Pauling, because Stephen Pauling was a wall.
Oh, he was a wall. It turns out that's Max Holloway's uncle, by the way. So
Wow.
yeah, and we talk about it all the time. Every time I see Max, he's like, "Oh yeah, you fought Uncle Bozo." Yeah, so I'm like, "All right," but yeah, man. Again, that was another situation. Jamie Levine. Here's the interesting thing about that fight is they asked me to do that fight, and at the same time, the UFC asked me to rematch Jens Pulver. They wanted me to fight Jens Pulver for the UFC title, and I turned it down. I said, "Nah, man, I ain't never been to Hawaii. I'm going to Hawaii, and I'm going to
Yeah.
Hawaii." And and I'm fighting Bozo, and man, that guy hit me. He hit me off of his, like, from the top or wherever he hit me from, and I was like, "Oh my God, I can't let this guy hit me again." And luckily, I ended up getting the triangle on him because, man, that guy, his hands were rock solid. That dude hit like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. Todd, what do you remember about that fight?
No, I mean the fans were not happy that he had won, and I know Dean was he gave it to the fans a little bit. They had
Yeah,
all those they had those
yeah,
little red laser lights they were shining on your face. Like he had these little red dots on his face, like he was gonna get shot any moment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and but at the time, again, this wasn't real to us. Like today, these guys, today, like that's part of the game. Creating a character for yourself. And for me, it wasn't real to me either back then. Like it was like a game for me. It was like, all right, make some money. I'm kind of a celebrity now. I'm in there fighting people, and it was fun. Like honestly, it was like that was the reward that we got. Nowadays, fighters are getting paid, and they're doing it to make a livelihood, but this wasn't necessarily like something that we treated as a career. We were just having fun. I mean, we were legit just riding around Hawaii on little mopeds and fighting their local guys and getting booed. I mean, that was fun for us. That was just like, yo, give me more of it.
For sure, for sure. And the Hawaii experience is that you fight a tough guy from there. Those guys always fought with a lot of pride of representing the island and things like that. And then their fans are like they're kind of like British fans, where like they go for their guys, and that's what's going on. You know what I mean?
And
So
I
Oh
think Ray
yeah,
lost to
I
Paul,
get it
right?
too. What's that?
I think Ray Cooper lost to Paul, or
Yeah, Paul beat
so
Ray
both
Cooper.
the fans were like it was like Dean beats Ray beats Paul, and pretty quickly, I think. So it's just
Yeah,
like the fans are just like, like they were real upset at that point.
and we beat them on the ground too, so I'm sure they
Oh
weren't
yeah,
happy about that because like those guys
yeah,
they're brawlers. So
yeah.
I'm sure they were like, "Oh man, these guys come here and beat us on the ground. I boo, boo them."
yeah. The fans were kind of the Hawaii fans were. I think they're expecting to see their guys win just like anywhere else, and they both
Yeah.
lost really quickly. And these were the guys who were high card guys, so yeah,
So
it was
now
bad.
here we go. You're 11-1. You go 12-1 against Scott Johnson, who I remember is Scotty the Body, who
Hmm.
with all respect, he fought a lot, was a brawler. I don't know if he was quite a top level dude, but he
No,
would
he's
fight
terrible.
yeah, he would fight a lot, and I would consider this a little bit of a down fight. Now you're 12-1, and now you do take the UFC's call and take the fight, and you get BJ Penn. Talk about this. Your debut in the
If I,
UFC and how it
well,
didn't go quite right for
originally
you.
my debut was supposed to be against Genki Sudo.
Okay. Wow.
So Genki Sudo was my original opponent for my debut, and but he pulled out like 3 weeks prior to the fight, and they asked BJ to do it because BJ had just had a fight over Joey Gilbert.
I was
So
Joey Gilbert's
BJ,
manager.
yeah, yeah.
Great
That's
fighter.
again small world, right?
Yeah.
So BJ, they asked BJ to do it, and I was like, yeah, no, whoever, I don't care, whoever. And BJ had just won the black belt division in jiu-jitsu, the first American to win the black belt division in jiu-jitsu. So that's what he was known for. So that's what I thought I was getting in there with. And yeah, and I was like, man, I done already beat Don Banfield, who's brown belt. Ain't no, what's he gonna do to me? And again, I was as confident as they could be. There was no way I thought I could lose. I remember being in the back, and again, this was they'd acted like this was in New York, but it was actually the Meadowlands in New Jersey. But everything was surrounded in New York. And I remember Carmen Electra was there at the press conference, and then at the fight, Dennis Rodman was there, and I remember just being like, "Yo, check me out! I'm about to destroy this dude." And I remember it was on TV, and I remember I was just like, "Yo, this is my moment! I'm about to get rich and famous. I'm about to knock a dude out and be rich and famous." And lo and behold, took my eye off the ball for 1 second, thinking I'm fighting a jiu-jitsu guy. Hi, he knocks me out. And I was devastated because I had never thought that was a possibility in my career. I didn't even think I could get knocked out just because, come on, man. I'm
Sure,
doing
no,
my thing.
that's that mentality that we talk about. The top guys thinking now. Well, to me, another problem, not problem, but another characteristic of the top guys like yourself is how you bounce back from that. You know what I mean? Because some people have lost. I don't want to. What was that guy's name? Gregor in the UFC, who was a wrestler. Then he got knocked out, and
Oh,
we
yeah.
haven't seen
Yeah,
we haven't
Gregor
seen him.
Gillespie. Yeah,
Yeah, we
Gillespie.
haven't seen him
Gillespie.
since. You come back to the UFC. Uh, just a few months later, it was probably in the next UFC, and you fight Fabiano Iha, and Iha was a guy that a black belt Brazilian, highly motivated, also with that mentality of there's no way you're going to beat me kind of thing. Did you worry about taking this fight? Did you or did you
No,
want it?
I wanted this fight. I was like, after I got knocked out, I remember I remember waking up, like legit, like waking up in the ambulance. Because I can't remember anything before that. Being in the ambulance, going to the hospital is when I legit was like, oh no. And that's when it hit me that I had gotten knocked out and lost. And I was like, yo, can somebody call the UFC and see if we can do it again? I was like, let's fight. Let me get another try at this. Let's do it again right now. And so when they asked me to fight again in September, which was on my birthday in Las Vegas, because it had never been in Las Vegas before, I was on it. I said, I don't care what it is. I'm training my ass off. I remember flying out to California and I trained with Rico Chiapparelli and Frank Trigg and those guys. And that's when 9/11 happened, because I was supposed to fly home on 9/11. I remember being at the airport on 9/11 in LA, looking up at the TV screens and watching the Twin Towers get blown up. And I had to stay in LA for an extra week because of that event. But I was motivated. Like, losing that fight motivated me like nothing else.
And
let's talk a little bit about Rico Chip, because he's somebody that doesn't get talked about much. But back then he was right up there with Hickson and kind of the way people talked about him.
Oh yeah, no, 100%, man. Because he was he had wrestled at Iowa. He had this incredible wrestling pedigree, and when you think about, like, Bo Nickel's different because he wrestles in a different way. That's how Rico wrestled. Like, he wrestled like a jiu-jitsu guy.
Yeah.
Like, very elusive and wiry, and he understood MMA at the time. Like, I remember him holding pads for Vladimir Matyshenko and understanding how to ground and pound, and understanding how to strike, and understanding how to use wrestling to get in for takedowns. And this was something that no other wrestlers knew at the time, because the other wrestlers were like Matt Hughes and Mark Coleman and those guys, and they were just brute strength guys. But Rico Chiapparelli was different, and he was well ahead of his time. Watching him operate was a blessing, and he was well ahead of his time. And I remember he charged me $1,000 for the week, and I was like, oh my God. But now looking back, I'm like, man, I owe that guy some money.
Yeah. Yeah. Him
Yeah,
and Mark Schultz really were, and Schultz was a power wrestler too, but him and Mark Schultz were the guys that kind of were learning jujitsu on the sly too. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Definitely, they were ahead of the other wrestlers at that point. Chipper, how was his personality though? Because some people attribute the fact that he didn't blow up and become a huge coach and everything like that to be him being kind of a dick. Just
No, I didn't
that's
think he was. Honestly, I didn't think he was a dick at all. I thought he was
okay.
really cool. I think he was a bit introverted. That's kind of what I think it was. I think he was very introverted and a bit very like an eclectic personality. Like he was into like doing. I don't know what he was into, but it seemed like he was into shit that like no one else was into.
Kind of like
And
an
he
Evan
wasn't.
Tanner.
Yeah, yeah, kind of like an Evan Tanner, but he
Okay.
wasn't a dick to me. I really do think that he was just different and liked what he liked
Okay.
and probably didn't like a lot of MMA guys.
Okay. And I'm sure that you're going to give a better assessment than the rumors and what I've heard. I've never gotten a chance to meet him or anything like that. But
I'll
so
tell you a story. Like when I first got out of the military, I came back to Oklahoma for a little while, and then I moved back to Hawaii. And TJ, I don't know if I called him or he called me or something. He said, "Come by my house, man. Come by." And and I've been gone a while. I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Just come by." So come by, and it was TJ, Rico Chip, and Pete Williams. They were all trained together in his garage. So we all kind of trained a little bit. Yeah. So that was the first time I met Rico Chiparelli. So
cool.
yeah.
Cool. Amazing stuff, man. And Rico was one of those guys too that got around and was doing the circus. So he charged you $1,000, huh?
Yeah, like he charged and but again, like I thought, man, oh my God. But now I look back and go, man, he all that he gave me, like I owe him some money.
Well, let me
Mm.
ask you, do you remember what you got paid for the BJ Penn fight? Will you share that with us?
I think I got paid 6 grand.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's for the time the UFC, that's not a bad payday for them in
No,
those
it
days.
wasn't. I think I got paid 6 grand for that. And he paid and I remember because Rico was like, how much you get paid? And I said 6 grand. I was like six. And he was like, just give me 1,000. And I was like, all right.
Okay, well, and
Yeah.
that's a good man, and he taught you valuable stuff. Let me say, here's another difference of what the modern game looks like compared to way back then. Now you're 1-1 in the UFC, but you probably didn't have like a UFC contract. You went off and got two fights, two wins on smaller shows. You put a Jason Bender and a Rob Baer on something called the RSF back to back, staying busy before taking some time off and returning to UFC 39, where you get a rematch with Kyle Luna. What was it occurring during that time frame in your life? What was going on?
I think I had surgery on my knee with that. And then that's when I actually joined American Top Team. That was my first fight with American Top Team. So I had actually moved from Orlando. I was training in Orlando with Paul Rodriguez, and we were just kind of going from gym to gym and scrapping with guys. And that's when I met Alex Davis,
Okay.
who was like, yo, man, you could be really good. You just need to get around some better guys, some better people. And like looking back now, I'm like, I don't know if that was even it. I'm like, I probably could have figured it out on my own, um, but so that's when I moved to South Florida, got with American Top Team, started training with American Top Team, and Kyle Uno was my first fight with American Top Team. And yeah,
Tell
again, a lot of learning lessons, man. Just a lot of trial and error and learning lessons and things that I can take away now to give to other fighters because these are decisions that you have to make. And I think what kills fighters' careers is they make decisions too late, like the right decisions too late. And I know that by watching guys operate in their careers, and I know that from things that I've done. So, but this was my first fight with American Top Team.
tell us about American Top Team like this because you were one of the first guys there. This first, how can I talk about like this first infusion of a lot of money into a gym where you
Yeah,
got this big, huge. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
I mean, it was attractive. It was attractive, and it made us feel like real athletes. because prior to this, we're going like to karate schools to spar with karate guys, or boxing gyms to spar with boxing guys, going to like high schools to wrestle with wrestlers. But then when I got to American Top Team, Dan Lambert had money, and he had the money to bring guys in. He had the money to bring coaches in. He had the money to send us to do strength and conditioning. He had the money, and he was giving us money every week so that we had food, and he gave us a place to live and eat. So this was the first time where I felt like, man, I feel like a real professional athlete, because now, there's money given to me, and I'm not coming out of my pocket for everything. So like that was a really good thing for us.
And one thing I remember, obviously, I work with Dan a lot as well. And, Dan is a special person in the sport. He's also a guy who also has a good eye for talent. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you were also, as well as the other package of helping you as a fighter, you were also one of the first guys. Did he help you open your own American Top Team gym? Because they started to have the affiliates and stuff, but you were definitely one of the pioneers of that as well.
For sure. And that was the thing too, is because the time, again, everything that we did back then wasn't like a career move. Like nowadays, fighters, everything they do, social media, they got to get, they're trying to negotiate bigger contracts. We didn't have that luxury. So for us, the fight game was over at any time. So I gotta, my heart goes out, and I want to, publicly say thank you and show my appreciation to Dan Lambert, because not only did he help me open a school, he also paid for me to take classes. Like I remember taking classes at the community college. I remember getting my degree, my AA, and Dan Lambert paid for my classes because I wanted to take classes. And he helped me open up my own school. And I mean, he really saw a bigger picture, because I don't know if he knew where the game was going to go, but he saw a bigger picture for us as human beings and individuals. And he helped us, live better, like our lives to be better, not just in the game. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing, because he doesn't get a lot of credit because he doesn't really like the credit, But I'll tell you a story I remember of him, because I used to be his matchmaker. I matchmade 15 shows for him. Your next fight with Berger was me making you fight Berger, but Dan didn't pay me, but I didn't ask to be paid. I had my job, and I was doing okay, and I wanted to do the sport just like everybody else, advance the sport. And Dan and I had a great agreement with, I could get my talent and get his guys fights and stuff, and he never put pressure on me. But every once in a while, I would call him up and ask him for a favor. And Eve Edwards had a baby that was having some medical issues. So I called him up and I said, Dan, I'm not asking for myself, but is there any way you can help Eve out? And so he wrote Eve a check. And Eve, who is a quality person, many months later or in the future, gave Dan the check back, returned the money to him. And me and Eve watched Dan rip that check up and throw it out. He wasn't going to take his money back, man. And that's the kind of man he was. He was really helping lay a great foundation for everybody. If you were a fighter, Dan was a person that respected you. You know what I mean?
I'll say this. I don't think MMA. We give the UFC did what it did for MMA. We know this. I mean, it's very public that we know what the UFC is to MMA. But I don't think that MMA could have been MMA without Dan Lambert.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, one of the top 5 most important people in the history of the sport.
For sure. There's without question. I don't think that the UFC could have done because Dan Lambert was going to buy the UFC. Thank God he didn't, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think that MMA would have been as good as it is without Dan Lambert. And that's a fact.
Yeah, we'll tell you something here, Dean. I don't know if you know this, but we talked to James Wormy. He worked for the UFC kind of in the SEG days, and I think he was telling me that deal was never going to go through. Like Bob Merowitz said, there's no way in hell I'm selling the UFC to John Peretti and Dan Lambert. I'm not going to do that no matter what. so it was
Just to be clear for people who may not know, that was because of Peretti and his strong personality, not because of Dan. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right, right. He was like, "There's no way on earth I'm letting John Peretti get the UFC. It's not happening."
Thank God.
So now you
Thank
get
God.
you've been back in the UFC after a couple of fights. You fight Carl Uno, and now this you know I'm going to ask you what's the most important victory in your career, but beating Matt Serra, a future UFC champion, a guy who flattened George St. Pierre, now another one of those black belts with talent that's out of this world. What do you remember about this fight? Because this is another fight that would probably mean you've taken another step.
Yeah, again, this was a big step for me because because Matt was a straight pioneer for East Coast martial arts. Everybody knew Matt. Henzo's top dog. He had beaten Paul Rodriguez in the Abu Dhabi trials to go to Abu Dhabi. So
That was
Matt was yeah, Matt yeah. Matt was a guy, and we had a little beef. This was when the internet first started popping. And I remember me and Matt Serra had a little beef on the internet. Well, it was really kind of me and Matt Serra's guys because Matt didn't have to talk. When you're a Long Island guy and you got beef for one, you got beef with the entire Long Island. So they pretty much shut me up. So this was an important fight, but it was originally supposed to happen and it got canceled because Matt had gotten into some legal trouble. So they had to reschedule it. But then it happened. It's weird talking about this fight with Matt because Matt is probably my best friend. Like today, we do a show together. I talk to him every day. But the reason why I can talk about this is because we fought. It was a split decision. They announced him as the winner, but the judges got it wrong. They scored it wrong on the scorecards. 10 minutes later, they came back, told me I was the actual winner. Loretta Hunt actually came back and told me that I'd actually won. But the reason why this is all significant is because I actually got a tattoo on my forearm right here that says, "Hey, Matt, I won." Because I like to make fun of him every time we see each other that he got his hand raised, but I actually won the fight. But Matt is my best friend. And again, that was a very strong moment for me because it was in Atlantic City. He's an East Coast guy, one of the primary East Coast guys. So it was a big deal for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I love hearing stories like that of the camaraderie. Like, when you fought another guy, and I don't have that experience, but I've witnessed it so many times. When you fought another guy, the bond and respect that you guys formed with each other is very, very special.
It's weird. The thing is, and this is why I don't like trash talk before fights. I actually hate it. I hate it. If it's not real, like when it's conjured up, because after the fight, you're going to develop a bond and a brotherhood with that guy that is just so special. And I share that with everybody I fight. Like even when I see BJ in events now, or Jens, I saw Jens at the UFC X a few weeks ago. Just like we just share a bond. And I always tell people like you're starting beef with this guy. You don't even know him. You'd probably be best friends with him if you did know him. But now you're starting beef with him. But when the fight's over, you guys are gonna be like best friends.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. It's happened so many times that I've been able to witness it that you got to note it, you got to credit it because it's there. It's a magic thing that happens, and thank you for sharing that with us. You now, as I
Except with
mentioned,
shootbox. Except with shootbox.
Well, like
Those guys
when
hated you
those
forever,
yeah, when those beefs are real, that's different, right? But when it's like you get signed to fight a guy and you're like, oh, I gotta hate this guy. To me, I'm like, just
Yeah,
don't do it because
I'm going to
you're
tell
going
you.
to
I'll
be
tell
best
you.
friends with him afterwards.
I'm going to share. It's part of my story, and I don't want to take away from Dean's story. But even shootbox, dude, even shootbox, you can't say that because I took Henry Matamoros, one of my main guys at Hook and Shoot, to Brazil, and he was Rafael Cordeiro's last MMA fight. They went 30 minutes in IVC with no rules. And then at the WEF 9, Henry fought Carl Schmidt. And Henry had me as his corner because he always took me because he goes, I don't care about a corner man. I just want to make sure that my manager gets me paid. Right. So Henry took me as his corner. And when we were walking out, Pele and Rudimar came out and said, "No, we're cornering Henry with you, man."
Really?
Absolutely, that happened, man. And uh, respect, and they sometimes have beef with me too. I was the judge for Pele Mane, and they didn't weren't happy with that decision. But yeah, they came out and they cornered me because Henry had fought their guy 30 minutes, man. I remember after that fight being at the bar with Rudimar, both of us getting bags of ice for our dudes. so
Man,
it happens. That would not it just doesn't instantly happen. It is a magic
Yeah.
moment. But shootbox has been I think they take care of some of their own guys too. I just want you guys to know that
Yeah.
there are no exceptions. If the magic moment happens, you're blessed to have it.
you shout out to Henry Matamoros. He's an old school gem.
Oh yeah,
And
he's
he
in
was
Florida
one of the
now.
first really good jiu-jitsu guys that were able to just chop people up on the mat. I used to love watching him fight.
Awesome, awesome. Now this next fight, another guy that you know, here's a guy who's an unsung hero, and that's Steve Berger. Now you're fighting in Florida. This is Dan's show, and I don't know if you know Steve Berger's backstory, but his mom was a paraplegic, and he would go home. He had to take care of her, help her out of bed, bathe, like anything him and his father went through. He would take his father with him to the fights and stuff, and they would always have to go back to the daily no breaks of life of taking care of somebody in that condition. So one of the mentally toughest guys I've ever met, and a guy who, because of that circumstance, also could never be like, I'm going to go train here or leave my house or do that. So he never got that bonus, especially after leaving Rodrigo Vaghi. He went full 15 minutes with you. What do you remember about this fight?
He went full 15 minutes, man, but it was probably the funnest fight I've ever had. I remember having a really fun time in this fight because that's when I saw that there's levels to striking, But I remember him being super tough, but just really slow on his feet, and I just had such a good time of just like stunting, and that was probably my funnest fight, the most fun I've ever had in a fight. But I know he had a lot of experience and a lot of he had fought Aaron Riley and Robbie and those guys. So I just remember him being really tough, but just being really slow on his feet. So it was a lot of fun for me to fight him. I didn't know this story about his mother, so I'm hearing this for the first time now, and I don't feel terrible.
Well, no. I think it's fair. I think that's a good reason why if Steve had been able to go to American Top Team or things like that, it might be different. But there are levels to the game. I respect. I loved Steve. I still talk to him. He's going to be on the pod. I've already interviewed him. He's going to be on the podcast. But again, there are levels to this game. You broke through. You beat Mishima. You beat other big name guys. Matt Serra. He was never able to break through against the Lawlers and the Rileys and the other guys like that. And that's, a defining moment for fighters. So it's notable, but, Steve deserves a respect and a shout out despite all that stuff.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, again, that was a proud moment for me because of his background. So to be able to win against him, I was proud of that. It wasn't like I was like, oh, because there was some way, like when I fight like Scotty the Body, I'm like, man, this guy's terrible. But to fight a guy like Steve, he was definitely a legit, super tough. So yeah, I hold that one with a lot of high regard.
Very nice, very nice. Now comes one of those fights. Maybe now here you're definitely fighting out of your weight class, but this may be the biggest show you were ever on. And that's Inoki Bombaye 2003, a New Year's Eve show in Japan. He's legendary. And you fight a guy who I booked a couple of times. He fought for me is Amar Suluev, a Russian guy. He's no longer with us. He passed away, or I think he was actually killed. But what was your experience here? Because Suluev was big.
Oh man, I don't know why I even took this fight. I took this fight out of spite. I don't know why, but it was like I cut my nose off to spite my face taking this fight because I remember they wanted Jeff Munson to fight him. Yeah, to get this, they wanted Jeff Munson to fight him, and he said no because Jeff was too big. But then he agreed to me, and I was like, "What?" of course, man, I was like upset by like offended by that. So I said, yeah. And I remember like I was always a film study guy. And I remember looking at film, watching his fight against Chuck Liddell as my I'm like, I'm watching a guy who fought Chuck Liddell. So and I remember being in Japan and I took Dustin Dennis with me, clean. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, clean, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and clean. I remember being in the back and clean was like, yo, Dean, don't let this guy hit you. He's gonna kill you if he hits you. This guy's a murderer. You can't let him hit you. And I'm freaking out like the whole time. I'm like, oh my God, why did I take this fight? I can't let this guy hit me. And this was one of the fights in my career that I truly regret. Looking in hindsight, I'm not sure if I did the right thing or not, but I just remember as soon as he hit me on the ground, I was like, all right, get me the hell out of here. I don't, just in my head, I was afraid because I just remember hearing Clean saying, this guy's going to kill you if he hits you. So I know I could have fought him tougher, so I regret that. But at the same time, he didn't kill me. So like, I don't know whether it was the right decision or not. But I just do remember thinking I could have fought him tougher.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Clean respect, obviously a super talented black belt and everything like that. But I don't think he did you like. There are other guys who would have had you better prepared without scaring you too on the mind games.
Yeah,
Some
but so I Clean pops up and he talks to me every once in a while. And about a year ago, he hit me up and he goes, you remember that time you fought Suliev? And that guy was a killer. He could have killed you. He was like, he could have killed you. And I was like, maybe he could have, man. But like, I like looking back, I would have rather that than like kind of went out like a bitch. I kind of would have rather him killed me than going out like a bitch.
No, I wouldn't call it that. But let me ask you, what was the whole Inoki Bombaye experience like? Because now you're talking about you're in a fight card with Fedor. That's something that
Yeah.
not a lot of people have the experience. What do you remember about all that?
I mean, it was massive. What I remember most about the whole experience was the after party. It was this room, a giant room, probably 30,000 square feet with food lined up side to side. And not just like regular food, but we're talking Kobe beef and just the spread on this place. It was such a massive thing. And that to me was like, whew, what a cool experience. Like Miguel, I gotta tell you, man, like the being in the fight game and the experiences that I've had, like I can die tomorrow and be like, yo, I've lived the life of many men.
Yeah.
Being in Japan, being in Japan during that time, Anoki Boma, him slapping people in the face, like it was such a cool thing. They were going around giving sake to people. I mean, it was such a cool experience.
Yeah. We had one of those after fight parties in Russia one time where this thing was on a Dutch Armada ship replica that was sitting on the river right across from the Hermitage Hotel, which is one of the Hermitage Museum, which is one of the old palaces of the czars. And it was crazy. You walking in, the first thing you see is a completely naked woman with bulldog body tattoos playing a saxophone.
I love it.
So,
But this also I have to include this into the story as well. They paid me in cash. They paid me 25 grand in cash. And I remember separating it, putting 5 in one pocket, 5 in another pocket, 5 in one shoe, 5 in another shoe, and then 5 grand in my crotch to get home. And I remember as soon as I got home, I put the money away, put it in my room, went to train on Monday, came back. Somebody had broke into my house, stole the money.
oh man.
I didn't even get a chance to take it to the bank. And I was going to probably just take it to the bank. I don't know why, but somebody stole the money. And I remember being so devastated. I was devastated. And I told Dan Lambert, and then he wrote me a check for 5 grand.
That's like, hey,
Were you trying to smuggle the money back or something? Why did you have to do it the way you did?
Yeah, I was trying to smuggle it back.
Because you
Well,
didn't want customs to take it or something?
Yeah, I
you
didn't want
you
custom.
you got to go through a whole. If you're
Oh,
carrying more than
right,
$10,000 in cash, you got to go through a whole process where they hit
right.
you up at that. How come you didn't? Maybe we don't want to get into it, but how come you didn't give half of it to clean?
How come I didn't give half to clean?
Like not give it to him, but have him
Yeah,
carry it for
good
you.
point. Yeah, yeah, to bring it back, good point. I don't know why.
Okay.
I have no idea why. I don't know why I didn't just like give it to the guys and be like, "Here, man, help me get this back in."
Yeah.
No idea why.
Okay. So, what was Fedor like? Did you have any interaction with him? Did you see him? Do you know?
You know, it's crazy because these guys at the time, like being there, like Josh. I remember Josh Barnett being there, and he was a big deal, and
Yeah.
so Fedor wasn't for whatever reason he wasn't like that big of a deal to me then.
Okay.
You know, like Fedor was there, like Fujita was there, and like all of them were big deals, but they weren't. But they didn't stand out like, oh my God, Fedor. Like they were all a big deal. So it was a big deal to be on this show
Yeah.
with everybody. So I think that's why like Fedor, like himself personally, didn't stand out because so many guys were on the show.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. You had like you mentioned Fujita, Alistair Overeem,
Yeah.
Fedor, Barnett. You had Fedor's brother Alexander on the show. Dutchman Rene Ruse, Rich Franklin, Semi Schultz. So yeah, just some
Rich fought what you call it? Like Machida.
Leonard Machida. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I remember that's when I met Machida. I remember him. He was with Rico Chiapparelli, and that's when I met Machida.
Awesome stuff. So yeah, so that's a legendary show that you were on. Now, I don't want to, it must have been a little bit of a fall from grace to come back to fight for me on AFC against John Strong. Did it feel like
No,
these
but Miguel, no, but I got to tell you, but that's the thing, man. It never coming up in those days. It never felt like that. It never felt like you got to come back down. It just felt like, man, these are just fight opportunities, and we just loved the fight game back, like the opportunities to fight. It didn't. It never. It felt like that in my later career, like coming back down. But at this time, man, we just love to fight. We love to be a part of the show. We just wanted to be a part of the show. So it didn't feel like I was coming back down to something. It just felt like, okay, this was a fight in Japan. Okay, that's cool. Now I'm fighting here, and that's cool too.
now, yeah, after that, you get to go back to Japan, and this guy is one of those guys that you wonder what happened to. What if? You know what I mean? And I'm talking about Tyrone Glover. Um,
Yeah,
you fought him in Deep, which is another one of those old school Japanese promotions, maybe a little smaller, obviously, than Bombay, but also well respected. And Tyrone Glover went 6-0, and then we never saw him again. What do you remember about this fight first? And have you been able to find out what happened to him?
well, I know that they were really high on him. He was training with Matt Hume and those guys, and they were really high on him. They expected a lot out of him, but I got robbed in that fight. I beat Tyrone Glover. I beat him, and they robbed me, and I'm still upset about that. There's two
Okay,
fights I feel like I got robbed because I was fighting because they were. I feel like they were using me because I had a name and fighting all these shows, and they were just trying to build people off of my name. So when they were close, they gave it to the other guy, and this was one of those fights because I beat that guy. I don't care what nobody says. I dropped him. I beat that guy, but he was still a good fighter. He was strong as an ox, but
yeah, it was a
um,
majority decision, so
yeah,
not everybody gave him credit for the fight. So it's
yeah.
pretty telling. But yeah, and that's always been a risk. You probably had teammates that got gypped in Japan too a lot.
Yeah, because I remember they were high on him and trying to push him, and I was like, man, they robbed me. But again, like at the time, you know, I I had so much experience in like all these different events and organizations. I mean, it bothered me, but again, it wasn't like the worst thing because it wasn't a career thing for me.
Okay. Now, you get back to the UFC here, and you go on a 3-fight winning streak, which has got to make you feel. And by now, you're into the UFC um, uh, actually, it looks like you have a 4-fight winning streak because you do the TV show, which is UFC
Yeah.
4, season 4 of The Ultimate Fighter. What do you remember about this? This is the comeback season or veterans coming back to the TV show for the first time.
Well, see now this kind of pivots into my current profession, um, of being a personality. This is so at the same time I had auditioned for The Ultimate Fighter, I had auditioned for the show called The Human Weapon, which was on the Discovery Channel. And I remember I really wanted to get that gig. I really wanted to get The Human Weapon. Jason Chambers ended up getting that with some football player, but I really wanted to get that. And I remember it came down to three of us: myself, Jason Chambers, and a football player. And they picked the other two guys, and I was like, no. But then I was like, well, darn it. I guess the Ultimate Fighter is still something that I can do. And I was thinking, what if they don't pick me for that? Like, if they didn't pick me for that, I don't know what I would like. I would probably not be in MMA now. Like, I would have just quit martial arts. But somehow I got on. Like, the beef that I had with Matt Serra got me on that show, and that was just a career resurrection in terms
Yeah,
of my
for sure.
career, and
Now, in the
it taught me a
tryouts,
lot about TV.
yeah, a lot of people speak to that, having a camera in your face. A lot of people don't like it, but you drink it up. You're good on camera that way. Um, you fought Mikey Burnett, and
Mhm.
Burnett is a guy who might be more old school than you, like in terms of like
Yeah,
when he fought
yeah.
first and stuff like that. So, what were your thoughts on Mikey?
I loved Mikey. Like, me and Mikey were friends in the house prior. And I mean, I don't have a problem fighting friends. I'm not like these guys that have to conjure up beef to fight them. But I loved Mikey. Mikey was a good guy, man. He was a homie, and I was glad to have fought him because he wasn't one of the bigger guys too, and he was pretty like I felt like he was very one dimensional in a sense. So I figured that like I could find a way to beat him.
Yeah,
So I was happy to have gotten that matchup too. So it was helpful for me.
yeah, Mikey came. Mikey, I don't think stuck with it long enough to evolve like a lot of the fighters did. I think he
Yeah,
came a lot with his original talent, which was a little wrestling or good wrestling, but meant to stay up and hit you hard, just box.
yeah. He could box and he could wrestle, but he just didn't have all the stuff in between.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And now he was a little smaller. Now you fight one of the guys that's a little bigger. Also, one of the guys that went to the finals, a guy who's a very good friend of mine too, is Chris Lytle. And Chris, I know, went to this with a professional mindset. Like, I'm here to win. I don't want to embarrass myself. And Chris is, he's on broadcast television now as well,
Mhm.
but he was like, I got kids. I don't want to embarrass myself on TV, and have my kids see it and stuff like that. A real 100% pro. What do you remember about Lytle?
He was my favorite training partner. We trained every day together. And even before the fight, we were warming up to work, like warming up. We knew what it was. We knew that. And this taught me a lot about competition too, is that the better guy is going to win. You can say you don't want to fight your friends or you don't want to do, but when you're competing, you're just competing, and the better guy is going to win. If he's better than me, he's going to beat me. And Chris taught me that. He was better than me, so he beat me. So, and there was nothing I could have did. There was nothing I could say or be mad about because he was just better than me. Um, Chris deserved to win. He's still a good buddy of mine. Today, he always tries to get me to go to his bare knuckle fights, um, but Chris, what a good human being. Like you summed it up perfectly. He's a good human being. He's a professional, and he's one of the good guys in the sport. And to this day, he's got one of the best retirements ever. So,
Yeah,
I'm I'm glad he got out with all his faculties.
yeah, I put him through. He fought Aaron Riley for me. I put him through a lot of early fights. In his first fight for me, he fought in a veteran a VFW, like 400 people there, and fought a tough guy named CJ Fernandez.
Mm.
He put CJ in the triangle. CJ picked him up, slammed him. In the first minute, Chris got a broken clavicle. Chris submits him 7 minutes later, fighting with a broken clavicle. And in those days, I think I paid him $300, you know? So a lot, you break your clavicle, a lot of people would tap out, but not,
Yeah.
not Chris, you know what I mean? And I couldn't be mad. It's like you broke your clavicle, you tapped out, here's your money, I would never have been mad, but I didn't even know he broke his clavicle till after. That's a man right there, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he was tough, man. And even after, it's like we spent some time training. We went to Arizona together and trained with in the Joe Riggs camp. So like Chris is he's a good dude.
Yep, yep. Now, the performance on The Ultimate Fighter, you get to the finale show. On the finale show, they put you in with another guy that may have, 60, 70 fights under his belt, and another guy that most people respect, and that's Rich Clemente.
Yeah, and Rich was another good dude who had been around a long time. We had all known each other, and he being from Louisiana. He actually fought on the Stomp in the Swamp, I think, like
Yeah.
one of them early fights. Yeah, so we had all been familiar with each other, and just being in the house, we were all cordial. But I liked the matchup. He probably liked the matchup for me too, but I liked the matchup for him just because, like, I think that at the time, like, I was faster than most guys, and I knew that, and I liked fighting guys that I knew that I were faster than. So, like with the Steve Berger fight, the Rich Clemente fight, I just knew I was going to be faster. So I always liked those matchups for me, even though they were bigger and like probably better wrestlers. I just knew I was faster than them.
Okay, good. And you got to win submission, rear naked choke in the second round. So now you're right back on Main Street in the UFC. What was the difference this time with the UFC than your run when you were in UFC 32, 33 in that era? Because it's at this point where you're getting a sense it was getting bigger.
Yeah, it was getting bigger, but so this is one thing that I try to tell fighters now is that fighting is very personal to you. And sometimes when you go off with a team, and this is again no disrespect towards American Top Team, but sometimes when you go off to a team, you lose some of that personal attachment you have to it because now you are you're part of a team, so you have a responsibility to the team. And I get that. And the team does good by you. Again, without Dan Lambert, I would have never made it. But by the time that I was in my second run in the UFC, I was kind of doing things on my own. Back to doing things on my own like I was in the early part of my career. And fighting became personal to me again. And when it was personal to me, I felt like I was a better fighter. And I think that was the difference around the second time, is that it was personal to me. And I was able to kind of establish things that were better for me as opposed to serving the team.
And you mentioned at the very start of our interview that the individuality of the sport was what made it appealing to you from the very beginning, and why you didn't like football and things like that. So very interesting, kind of like a full circle thing.
Yeah.
So now you're fighting at the highest level. You got a win with Rich. You beat Burnett. Lytle. So you're 2-1 in this UFC run. You're about to go 3-1 as you fight Clay Guida, another one of those guys that put together a massive UFC career and a fantastic run with all kinds of highlight fights and highlight reels and things like that. What's your memory about Clay?
Yeah, I knew he was going to be tough. Did a lot of homework on him. Just such a buzzsaw. I knew he wouldn't get tired. And I remember fighting him, and he was like really just a buzzsaw, like the Tasmanian devil. Really greasy too, and it's because of his hair was all over the place. I think that's kind of what won me to fight because I mean I know him and his brother, they were so upset at the end of the fight, like they thought they won. But I think the reason why I might have got the decision, I was in Florida, so I may have gotten some hometown help. But just the fact that he has so much hair that every time I hit him, his head flew back, that might have won me the decision. But it was a good fight, and I think it could have went either way. But I learned a lot from fighting him, and again, I'm so proud of him that he's still in the UFC. And every time I see him, I always make that a point to let him know that I'm so proud of him. He's my last connection to the UFC in terms of combat.
Yeah, I know he's a interesting character, and he was a good interview as well. A lot of fun, a lot of insights and stuff. Now you're about to go and get your record to 4-1 in this latest UFC run against another tough guy, Jeremy Stevens.
Yeah, and this was Jeremy's first UFC fight. So he was young. And I remember him training with Josh Neer at the time, and he was one of the Midwest boys. It was like really tough and hard nosed and scrappy. But again, I knew that I was probably going to have the speed advantage and the experience advantage in terms of, and this is what I learned from Uno. Like I knew, like when the first time I fought Uno, I think he looked at me the same way. He's too young, too inexperienced. And I looked at Jeremy Stevens the same way, too young, inexperienced. So I knew I was going to be able to somehow take advantage. And yeah, and that win, it aged well. So
Yeah, for
Jeremy
sure.
had a
Now,
great career.
yep. Now let me ask you, at this point, you're clearly you're a veteran, like you said, and you're starting to look at guys like, okay, I'm experienced and things like that. Where was your speed going away at some point? Did you feel like your body might be changing, or were you still at the top of your feelings?
No, at this point, I'm early to mid 30. I'm in my mid 30s, early to mid 30s. So at this point, and that's another thing too, is that, as you evolve in the game, your game has to evolve with the evolution of your body, the injuries that come with it, your personality as you're changing, all that stuff. Again, this is why to me it has to be personal, because all these things are changing and no one knows what it's like except for yourself. So I remember being on, like, being with the team and doing team practices, and I'm just thinking, and I can't do some of this stuff. It's just not conducive to where I'm at in life right now. And I still had to go through it. So, but as I'm getting older, I'm slowing down a bit. My footwork ain't as good. My head movement ain't as good. So, I mean, look at Bobby Green last night. That, to me, that's very indicative of what I'm talking about. It's just as you get older, and when you rely on a style that relies on speed and elusiveness, you have to be able to change with it. And at this
Yeah.
point, I'm starting to feel it.
And sometimes it comes like I always I talk about this factor, I always talk about it when it comes, it comes. Chuck Liddell is a good example of when it showed up. The famous example to me is when Weidman caught Anderson Silva. Maybe he wouldn't have caught him 2 years before. I don't think. Well,
and it's an overnight thing,
yeah,
and you don't know when it really is going to hit you and account. That's why when these matchups happen and it's an older guy and a younger guy, I'm like, I don't know, man, because if he gets old overnight, we're going to see it, and we just don't know if tonight's tonight.
yeah, for sure. Now with the UFC, you're obviously fighting. Their roster is the best in the world at this point. You're obviously fighting all top guys. Next fight is a guy that was on the doorstep of the title, and that's Kenny Florian, also a guy who spent time on TV and stuff like that. What was your Kenny Florian experience like?
I
The
was
main event
originally
also.
I was originally supposed to fight Spencer Fisher.
Okay.
But he had gotten staff, so I remember them giving me the call. But hey, listen, Spencer got staff. We're gonna bring in Kenny Florian, and I was ecstatic because no one at the time thought Kenny was really that good. We kind of looked at him as a nerd, so no one really thought he was that good. And I was just like excited to fight Kenny. But again, like at this time, this is when I started questioning, you know, did I really want to do MMA? Like, the money wasn't even worth, the squeeze wasn't worth the juice anymore. Money wasn't really there. I'm getting injured all the time. And so like my heart really wasn't in it all that much. And I had already started having knee problems and just, but I still was like, yo, but I'm still going to, try to beat Kenny up. But, and then I remember the fight happened. I ended up tearing my knee in the fight. And it's just, then this is like when my career just started being like, man, is this worth it?
Yeah. I think Miguel got up for a second.
Must be just disgusted with my story.
No. He tried to do something. He's got dogs with him, but I'll kind of carry it. So, when you're fighting Kenny, obviously he had a lot of success. Maybe kind of talk about as you fought him and seeing him kind of grow in success, you weren't really expecting it at the time because when
Well,
you fought him.
we all knew that Kenny was smart, but we didn't know that he was going to be as good as he was. I mean, he had a lot of success. I mean, when you talk about guys who were really good that never won a title, his name has to be in the conversation as some of the best guys to never win a title because he fought for it in two different divisions. And he's done so much for his angle of the sport that you have to give him his props on what he's done for MMA. And Kenny's still one of the brightest guys in MMA today. Like his analysis is always on point. His podcast with John Anik is super sharp. So Kenny, again, another person that I'm so glad to have a relationship in the fight game with.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm sorry, my dog bit the gardener, is what was going on there. So, um, uh, so your next fight now, you mentioned Spencer Fisher, Jeremy Stevens. Now you're fighting another guy cut from that same Midwest tough guy cloth that never stops coming forward that you could hit, and it's Josh Neer. What do you
Yeah,
remember
so
about the
and
Josh Neer fight?
Josh Neer was a welterweight going down to lightweight, and so I was his introduction to lightweight. And at this point, I was kind of over fighting. I had done so much, and I was just kind of over it. Wasn't making a lot of money, and I started, I had my schools, and I was just kind of like, what am I doing? Still doing this, and I wasn't really 100% motivated at this point. And I think I really just wanted to retire, but fighting is all I knew. So and I didn't know how to retire. So I was like, I'm just going to fight. But I remember when I lost that fight, I knew that I was done. I knew that I was like, this isn't really worth it to me anymore. But
Yeah,
yeah, my heart was not in fighting at that point.
I want to ask you
no,
something about that because, guys retire. I think fans, watching the sport, they're like, oh, these guys are in a big show. And you were in a big show. It's a big show at that time, the UFC was. Kind of take maybe newer, or all of us for that case. What makes you think it's not worth, so fans can understand why it might be different today because guys are making more money or whatever. But why do you think guys walk away when they're in this big show and people know who they are? Maybe help fans understand that.
Well, I mean, when your life revolves around, waking up in the morning, training, the training is really hard, and you sacrifice a lot of time away from friends and family. You don't really get to do a lot. And then when you get a fight and you're making, 10 grand and you're fighting 3 times a year, and then if you make 10, I mean, you end up really on the poverty levels of fighting. I mean, you're not making no money really for what you're doing. And you're seeing your friends and they got nice cars but they're also looking at you because like you've been on TV and you're a professional athlete. They're looking at you like, and they think that you're making millions of dollars, but at the end of the day, you're really making, 15 grand a year, probably
now
15, 20 grand a year.
let
And
me
you're
ask
just
you,
like,
you gave some credit to Jamie Levine and the Ultimate Fighter, obviously. There was a progression of you becoming, comfortable in front of the cameras, and that's what you do nowadays. Was that already coming into your focus in life at this point? Is it like you knew you had another option?
yeah. So, but I didn't necessarily know that it was going to come to fruition the way it did. I just knew that I liked doing it. And again, I'm going to go back to one of the things that Dan Lambert helped me with, and that was, taking college classes. I was taking classes at the college. One of them being, I ended up taking an acting class. So again, it all kind of wraps around and kind of builds into the future that I ended up creating for myself, uh, being a personality and being an actor and doing all these different things. So it really did come around and help me for what my future brought for me.
And it's interesting because, one of the items that you've, made pretty clear here is how personal the fighting is, And, at the end, it's got to be real because at the end of life and things like that, you're alone. You know what I mean? At the end of your career, too, you're alone. I'll tell you, who told me an unbelievable story about this and who also got to move on to a fantastic new career. You remember Shayna Baszler?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So Shayna is fighting Amanda Nunes in Brazil in a huge stadium, and she's looking around while they introducing Amanda, and she's going, this is probably the last time I'm going to do this. And in the ring, in the octagon, because she was already had the pro wrestling gig not lined up, but she was already leaning towards moving on because she just didn't the grind. So yeah, it happens. It happens to the best of people where it's like they just don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, it's just and I get it too. I mean, it's hard and there's a lot of expectations. And I don't want to say it's even easier now because of social media. It might even be harder, but at least there's a lot more reward, or at least potential for reward for fighters now. Like at least, I know a lot of guys who made a lot of money and are living good from the fight game now. So at least
And that's
there
nice
are some
evolution.
benefits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the things that goes with being a pioneer like yourself is that, the love of the sport is the reason you did it and you didn't reap the rewards. We've mentioned a few of the guys that were not able to reap the rewards. Steve Berger's a guy, Chris, I think, is probably doing better in retirement than he was with the actual fight salaries and purposes, Chris Lytle and things like that. So talk about how you actually wound up in your current gig now. How did you interview? Who were you up against? Like what was that competition like?
So no, I had gotten really lucky with my current gigs now, and it all happened because I was training Amanda Nunes at the time. She was training for um Misha Tate, and I remember getting a phone call from Dana, but I didn't know it was Dana. I just saw a 702 number on my phone. So normally when I see a number I don't know, I hang up on him. And then Matt Serra calls me and he's like, "Yo, Dana's trying to call you." And I'm in practice. I'm like, "Yo, all right, man, hold on, I'll call him back." So I said, "All right, Dana's calling me, so I gotta figure this out." So I told Amanda, hold on a second. I go back into my office, call Dana, and he's like, "Hey, you ever seen the show Looking for a Fight?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, one of my favorite shows." I had never seen the show before, but I lied to him. And he said, "Well, listen, our guy Nick the Tooth, the guy who's on it, we had a falling out. He's not going to be able to do the show anymore. Matt Serra suggested you, so you interested?" And I was like, "Of course, hell yeah!" Being in front of the TV, being on TV with Matt again, of course. And he said, "But the catch is you got to leave tomorrow." I said, "Man, send a ticket. I got a bag packed in the car." And that's when the rap man. And then I started Looking for a Fight with Dana and Matt. And that show was a hit. I mean, we still every so often film an episode, but the show was a hit. Now, but this is how I got my current gigs. We were filming an episode of that in Abu Dhabi, and my bike and I got into bike riding, and my bike riding partner in the day was the vice president of production, and I didn't know who he was. I just knew that he wanted to ride bikes and do about 30 miles in Abu Dhabi, and I was down. And we would ride bikes and we talk about fights. And he said, "Hey man, you listen, I think you'd be really good on the desk on air." And I was like, "You think so?" He was like, "Yeah, man. We talk fights. You're really good at it. I think you'd be good at it." And he said, "I'm gonna have a guy contact you." Next thing I know, man, Zach Candido from the UFC contacted me, gave me a 3-year deal. I signed another deal after that, and now I'm one of the UFC's analysts. All because of just the ball rolled down of all the things that I've been putting in over the years of being on camera, doing this, doing that, talking fights. It just all kind of culminated into what I'm doing today.
Yeah, I couldn't
So
think
you
of a
kind of
nice
reap the
guy for that
rewards
to happen.
after the fact.
Yeah, I reap the rewards after the fact. So all that I went through in the beginning, I use as experiences now for whether I'm talking about the fight game or coaching fighters, because I've been through it all, man. I've seen everything.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, talk about bike riding in Abu Dhabi. What you do? Head out to the desert?
No, so this was actually during COVID. So there was nothing to do there. So and they had Fight Island, the infamous Fight Island. So we would ride around the island, the quote unquote island, like doing laps and for like an hour and a half
Okay.
every morning. So
Cool.
um
Cool. How
and
long did you
trust me,
spend
man,
out there?
in 100 degrees,
Yeah,
100-degree weather.
I've been to Abu Dhabi a few times, and I remember one time, only one time. I've been there probably 2 months total, spread out, and once it rained, and people came out with their video cameras to tape the rain.
Abu Dhabi's I love Abu Dhabi, but it's just too hot. I'm going next week actually, but it is just too hot for me.
Cool, cool, cool. So you're obviously still active in the game. We just watched UFC 304. As we wrap up here, let you go. You've given us an amazing amount of time, an amazing amount of insight. But what are your thoughts on the Leon Edwards dropping his title to Muhammad?
I'm not surprised after watching it. I didn't think it was going to happen. I actually picked Leon to win, but Bilal Muhammad is such a dog, and that's one thing I know about this game after years and years and years of being in it is that timing is everything. And he caught Bilal at the wrong time. Where Bilal is motivated and he trained properly. He's super motivated, and he just caught him at the wrong time. I think Leon might be a better, more well-rounded martial artist, but it's Bilal's time right now.
Yeah. And the UFC, part of it is getting lucky on a business end. And you mentioned going back to Abu Dhabi on the business end, having a Muslim fighter with the title. I think he may be the first Muslim fighter with a UFC title. Well, Khabib, obviously, but
Islam.
An Arab fighter.
yeah, yeah,
First Arab
exactly.
fighter, yeah.
This may be something that they can spin it and make even more money.
I think so. I mean, I know the UFC is always looking for those angles. And if I'm Bilal, I'm trying to be included in that and be like, hey, listen, how can we spin this into making this title run as fruitful for me as I possibly can make it? And he should lean into that.
He deserves it. And as we leave here, just because I still love to think about the game, I do love the sport. One opportunity that the UFC is going to lose with this is, you're wondering about what they do with Conor next. And, I think Conor's a guy that where you got to work on him is the motivation because, what motivates the guy's got so much going on in business and this and that. And the UFC can do whatever they want. So to me, him and Leon Edwards for a title, that would have made Conor possibly a 3-division world champion. They could have done that fight in a stadium in London, 90,000 seats. You know what I mean? So
that's
just
true.
opportunity lost.
Motivation and with his attention span, like Conor has a short attention span. Like I really do think he wants to fight, but then he makes these dates so far away that by the time the dates come up, he don't want to do it no more.
Yeah, yeah. And money, you could throw 30 million at him for the fight. He's the one guy that doesn't need that 30 million really. You know what I mean?
No.
And so you got to motivate him. Otherwise, if he were to be the UFC's first 3-weight division champion, maybe now you're into the motivation. Certainly in some corners, it would even put him back into a GOAT conversation kind of thing.
Sure.
And I think that motivation is something that the UFC may have missed out on. Maybe they talked to him like at that level, but I think that some of that should have been public, that they're bringing him along with the idea. And I know I hate nothing more than guys like Stipe, Frankie Edgar, when they get skipped over for their title shots. But in this case, skip everybody in 170 over and put Conor in there. That's what I would have done.
Well, you know what? You're right about that. But I think they missed the opportunity because even though I don't think he would have beat Leon, he has no chance of beating Bilal.
Yeah, and Bilal against Conor, they want to do the same thing and skip him in Abu Dhabi. It would be lucrative, but it's not the same thing as a 90,000 seat arena in London.
Right, for sure.
So for sure, Dean, I could sit and just BS fights with you for the rest of the night, but I know that you're a man with a life and a lot going on. I know you're coming back off the road and stuff. You've already given us an amazing amount of time, so I'm going to let Todd get you with maybe one last question, then we'll cut it off and let you go. And I thank you a great deal. Thank you so much for everything.
For sure, man. For sure.
Maybe I'll give you one quick, like, we just had the event. Maybe besides what we just talked about, just give us maybe a thought or two of what we just saw.
Of
The
of
event last
Aspinall?
night. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just of the
Aspinall-
event in general.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, the event MMA today is a different animal. I'm so happy to still be a part of it because the love that I have for it is the same as it's always been. The same when I was fighting on small regional shows. The love I still have for it is the same. It's a different animal now. We have to appreciate it. And last night was just indicative of the animal that it is out in Manchester, England. These guys getting $100,000 bonuses. Tom Aspinall, a heavyweight, like something we've never seen before, just so much skill and athleticism all coupled into something that, again, we've never seen that before. So MMA right now is the greatest it's ever been. But I think that we are, in terms of like me, you, Todd, Miguel, we're in a different place because we know what it used to be. And we have to try to appreciate it for what it is now. Some people might not like it if you're an old school guy, but we have to appreciate it what it is now and see if we can't capitalize off of of what we can now. But I got to say, I miss you guys. I love you guys. You guys have been around forever. And if it wasn't for guys like you, we wouldn't be able to have what we're doing today. So, you guys deserve a lot of credit for that.
Well, Dean, I appreciate that a great deal. And I will say this, Aspinall, John Jones, Connor, all these guys, they are standing on your shoulders. And Todd and I are very happy to have seen that, seen the whole evolution of it. Thank you, man. Thank you for the time.
All right, guys. Y'all be good, man. Have a good one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.